I thought I could outsmart a liar, but lies have a way of building entire cities while you're still collecting bricks of truth. My name is Andre Whitlock, and I'm 35 years old. Each morning I wake before dawn in the home I built with my own hands, pouring coffee into the silence that replaced my marriage. Jazz, my wife of 7 years, didn't just cheat. She architected an elaborate fiction where I became the villain for noticing the evidence she left in plain sight. Danny Mercer, her project manager friend, helped her construct that fiction, brick by calculated brick, until the day I followed her taillights to that budget motel and watched my reality collapse. The carefully planned financial transfers, the coordinated stories. It wasn't just infidelity. It was assassination of character, of trust. I won't let them rewrite me. I'll show you how I reclaimed my name with receipts, recordings, and cold, hard facts. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. I didn't know what I expected to find when I parked my truck beneath the flickering neon sign of the Hillcrest Motel. The rain tapped against my windshield like tiny fingers, impatient and insistent. I'd followed a hunch, or maybe it was more than that. When you've been with someone for 7 years, you develop a sixth sense. You notice when their eyes don't quite meet yours anymore, when their phone suddenly needs a new password, when yoga starts running 2 hours instead of 1. I killed the engine and sat in darkness, the last of my lukewarm coffee bitter on my tongue. My hands were steady, but my heartbeat wasn't. Part of me still hoped I was wrong, that there was some explanation that wouldn't tear my life in half. Then Jazz's white SUV pulled into the lot, headlights cutting through the rain before going dark. She stepped out, checking her reflection in the window before hurrying toward the covered walkway. No gym bag, no yoga mat, just my wife, in a dress I didn't recognize, disappearing into the stairwell. "Come on," I muttered. "Prove me wrong." 10 minutes ticked by on the dashboard clock. I was about to get out when another car pulled in, a dark sedan I recognized from company functions. Danny Mercer, project manager at one of our subcontracting firms. He checked his phone, smiled at whatever message he saw there, and walked straight to room 14 without hesitation, like a man who'd made this trip before. Something cold settled in my chest. 7 years of marriage, and it took 10 seconds to know it was over. I waited until the room light dimmed before stepping out into the rain. The neon sign hummed above me, bathing everything in a sick red glow. Inside the small lobby, a bored clerk looked up from his phone. "Help you?" he asked, not really caring about the answer. I cleared my throat, surprised at how normal my voice sounded. "My wife forgot her key. Room 14. Name's Whitlock." He glanced at the computer screen. "ID?" I slid my driver's license across the counter. He looked at it, then at me, hesitation flickering in his eyes. "She expecting you?" "Would it be a surprise if I said no?" I replied, allowing a thin smile. Something in my expression must have told him all he needed to know. He sighed, ran the duplicate key card through the machine, and handed it over without another word. "Thanks," I said, pocketing the card. "Appreciate your discretion." The stairs to the second floor creaked under my weight, each sound amplified in the hollow stairwell. The hallway carpet was worn thin in the middle, stained with years of spilled drinks and God knows what else. Room 14 was at the end, a thin line of light visible beneath the door. I stood there, key card in hand, heart hammering against my ribs. I'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times in my head, but now that it was here, I felt strangely calm. I slid the key in, watched the light turn green, and pushed the door open. The room smelled like cheap air freshener trying to cover up cheaper sheets. Jazz was on the bed, Danny's hands halfway up her dress. They froze like a paused movie, eyes wide, mouths open. Andre, Jazz gasped, scrambling to her feet. What are you doing here? I almost laughed. What was I doing here? In this motel room where my wife was cheating on me? What am I doing? I pay for the phone you used to book this room, I said, my voice level but tight. Say his name. It's not what it looks like, she tried, pulling her dress down. It looks like my wife on a motel bed, I said. Say his name. Danny, she finally snapped, dropping the shocked act. Her eyes narrowed. And if you'd been a husband instead of a hall monitor. I laughed then, an ugly sound that surprised even me. Right. You cheat, I'm controlling. Classic. Danny stood up, buttoning his shirt with clumsy fingers. Maybe give her some space, man. I turned to him, taking in his expensive watch, his carefully styled hair. You rented this with my credit card points. Congratulations. You just made this my business. His face paled. He hadn't known that part. Jazz grabbed her purse, chin high like she was the one who'd been wronged. I'm done pretending. I'll be at the house for my things tomorrow. She pushed past me toward the door, then turned back. And Andre? I'm taking what I'm owed. Take the truth, I said. It travels light. She slammed the door behind her. Danny stood awkwardly, trapped in the room with me. Look, man, relationships are complicated. He started. Save it, I cut him off. You've got about 30 seconds to disappear before I forget I'm not the kind of man who solves problems with his fists. He didn't need to be told twice. The door closed behind him, leaving me alone in a room that reeked of betrayal. I gripped the doorknob on my way out, feeling a tremor in my hand that hadn't been there before. The rain had turned to a downpour when I stepped outside, soaking through my jacket in seconds. I barely felt it. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Jazz. You'll regret this. I looked at it once, then deleted it. She had no idea what regret really meant, but she would. The next morning, I was in my kitchen, coffee untouched, when the knock came. Sharp. Official. I opened the door to find a thin man in a windbreaker holding a manila envelope. Andre Whitlock? He asked, already knowing the answer. That's me? You've been served, he said, pushing the envelope into my hands before walking away. I stared at the envelope in my hands, the paper heavy with more than just its physical weight. My name was printed in stark black letters on the front. Andre Whitlock. The red summons stamp across the corner told me everything I needed to know before I even opened it. Back in the kitchen, I tore it open and spread the contents across the counter. Legal jargon spilled out in neat, organized paragraphs. The dismantling of my life in 12-point Times New Roman. Divorce papers. Standard enough. But what caught my breath in my chest was the attached restraining order request. Pattern of controlling behavior, financial isolation, aggressive monitoring, threatening demeanor, following discovery of infidelity. I read it twice, then a third time, my coffee going cold beside me. The words blurred as my pulse pounded in my ears. It was like reading about a stranger wearing my name, some alternate universe version of me that Jazz had conjured from thin air. Are you kidding me? I said to the empty kitchen. My wedding ring caught the morning light as I gripped the counter. It had been less than 12 hours since I'd walked into that motel room, and she'd already painted me as the villain in our story. I paced the length of the kitchen, the house too quiet, too empty. 7 years of marriage reduced to paperwork and lies. Down the hall, our bedroom door stood ajar. Jazz's perfume still clung to the pillow she hadn't bothered to take. That familiar vanilla and jasmine scent now turned sour in my nose. Remember our 3rd anniversary? The cabin in the mountains where the air smelled like pine and wood smoke? And Jazz wore that flannel shirt of mine as we watched the sunset from the porch. She'd leaned against me and whispered, "Forever feels too short with you." Forever lasted exactly 4 more years. I grabbed my phone and called Frank Reeves, the attorney who'd helped me set up my contracting business. He listened, made sympathetic noises, then stopped me. "Andre, You need a specialist for this. Family law isn't my area. Let me refer you to Rita Coleman. She's the best in town for these situations." An hour later, I had an appointment for that afternoon. Rita's office occupied the fourth floor of a downtown building that had once been a factory. Exposed brick and steel beams spoke of its history, while the sleek furniture and art announced its present. The receptionist led me to a conference room where case files were stacked in neat piles. "Mr. Whitlock," Rita said, extending her hand as she entered. She was shorter than I expected, early 40s maybe, with sharp eyes behind rectangular glasses. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. You and me both." She sat across from me, opening the file I'd forwarded to her office. "I've reviewed what you sent over. She's moving fast," Rita said, tapping the restraining order request with a manicured nail. "You need to move faster." "Meaning what exactly?" "Meaning we gather everything now, before she can start hiding it. Bank statements, text records, photos, emails, anything that proves the reality of your marriage versus the fiction she's creating. I've started some of that already." Rita nodded approvingly. "Good. We need to respond to this restraining order request immediately. It's baseless from what you've told me, but judges can err on the side of caution in these situations." I leaned forward. "She's trying to take my house, my business, and we're not going to let her." Rita's voice had the calm certainty of someone who'd fought this battle many times before. "But I need you to be methodical. No angry texts, no confrontations. Document everything." "Can you do that?" "Yes." That evening, I transformed our home office into a war room. I printed bank statements going back 18 months, credit card bills, phone records. Each page revealed a pattern that Jazz thought she'd erased. Our joint account showed regular withdrawals of $300 labeled personal, always on Thursdays, always followed by charges at that same motel within hours. I marked each date on a calendar, creating a timeline of betrayal. Then I moved to our shared financial app. The one Jazz had probably forgotten I could still access. There they were. Transfers labeled Wellness Retreat. 20 in the past year. Funny how her wellness coincided perfectly with Danny's days off. The longer I dug, the colder my anger became. This wasn't just an affair. This was calculated, planned. And now she wanted to take what was left of me. By midnight, the printer had finally gone silent. Papers covered every surface. Evidence of a life I thought I knew, revealed as something entirely different. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, low and ominous. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the ruins of my marriage and the foundation of my defense. "You wanted a fight," I whispered to the empty house. "You've got one." The clock on the wall struck 12. The printer hummed one last time, and outside, thunder rolled like distant applause. The next morning, I met Rita at her office with 2 cups of coffee, black for her, cream and sugar for me. Dark circles underlined her eyes, matching my own. "Sleep's overrated," she said, accepting the cup with a nod. "Let's get to work." She cleared the conference table and laid out a large poster board. "We're mapping a timeline. Every interaction, every withdrawal, every lie. It all goes here." I pulled out my phone. "I've got the bank statements." "Good. We need screenshots of text messages, phone bills showing calls between them, and any proof of spending connected to Danny. I want dates, times, and dollar amounts. Jazz thinks she's writing the story here. We're going to rewrite it with facts." For the next 3 hours, we reconstructed the past year of my life. Each receipt, each transaction, each suspicious absence, all pinned to the board with red markers highlighting patterns. The affair had a rhythm, like a business schedule. Thursdays and some weekends. Never holidays. Always at the same motel, except twice when they splurged on a downtown hotel. "You'll need to get the credit card statements showing the room charges," Rita said. "And check your rewards accounts. If they used points from joint cards, That's marital assets used for infidelity. I spent the next 2 days hunting digital fingerprints. Our joint account showed regular withdrawals that aligned perfectly with motel stays. Jazz had been careful, but not careful enough. She'd forgotten about the automatic backups of our shared cloud photos, including screenshots she'd taken of messages with Danny that synced to our shared account before she deleted them. Each discovery hardened something inside me. This wasn't just betrayal, it was embezzlement from our life. That evening, Jazz arrived to collect her things. Her parents' sedan pulled up behind her SUV. Paul and Janice stepped out, looking anywhere but at me as I opened the front door. "We're just here to help Jazz get some necessities," Paul said, his voice strained with discomfort. I nodded once and stepped aside. Jazz walked in like she owned the place, wearing the confident mask I'd once found attractive. Now I could see straight through it. "Let's be civil about this," she said, her voice artificially light. "I'm just taking my clothes and personal items for now." "Civil ended at room 14, I replied, keeping my voice level. "Take what's yours, leave what isn't." Jazz headed upstairs while Janice hovered awkwardly in the living room. Paul cleared his throat. "Andre, these things happen in marriages. Nobody's perfect. This isn't about perfection, Paul. It's about choices." I met his eyes. "Your daughter made hers." Jazz returned with a suitcase, her expression hardening when she spotted me still standing there. "Always need to watch everything, don't you?" she sneered. "Always need control." I didn't respond verbally. Instead, I walked to the side table and retrieved a manila folder. I extended it toward her, my hand steady. "What's this supposed to be?" she asked, not taking it. "Itemized withdrawals from our joint account. Dates match the motel charges, amounts match the room rates. I've highlighted the ones that coincide with your yoga classes." The room went silent. Paul's eyes darted between us. Janice's hand flew to her mouth. Jazz snatched the folder, flipped it open, then slammed it shut. For just a moment, the mask cracked. Rage and something like panic flashed across her face before she smoothed it away. "You're pathetic," she whispered. "I'm thorough," I corrected. "There's a difference." After they left, I stood in the empty hallway. The house felt hollowed out, like something had been scooped from its center. My phone rang. "Rita." "Andre, Jazz's attorney just filed for temporary alimony. They're claiming you controlled the finances and left her without resources." My jaw tightened until I heard a faint click in my ear. "She's been planning this." "What do you mean?" "The affair wasn't passion. It was strategy. She needed somewhere to land before she jumped." After we hung up, I recorded a voice memo, documenting the entire evening's events while they were fresh. What Jazz said, what she took, how her parents reacted. Rita had advised me to keep these audio journals for my own protection. Outside, the rain tapped lightly against the roof, a gentle counterpoint to the storm building inside me. I finished the recording, checked that it saved properly, and whispered to the empty room, "She thinks she's ahead. She has no idea what I'm building." The courthouse hallway had that peculiar antiseptic smell, like someone trying to scrub away all the human misery that had soaked into the walls. Rita sat beside me on a hard wooden bench, reviewing papers with the mechanical precision that made me hire her in the first place. Her fingers tapped silently on each page as she moved through them. "Remember," she murmured without looking up, "stay measured. Let them take the emotional swings. We're only dealing in facts today." I nodded, watching the hallway doors. Part of me still couldn't believe this was happening. Sitting in a courthouse, about to face the woman I'd built a life with. Now a stranger manipulating the system against me. When Jazz walked in, she did it with practiced confidence. Chin up, shoulders back, heels clicking like exclamation points against the tile floor. Her attorney, a silver-haired woman whose suit probably cost more than my truck, walked beside her with a hand lightly touching Jazz's elbow, guiding her like she was fragile. The performance wasn't lost on me. Jazz's eyes swept past me without acknowledgement. She'd cut her hair since I last saw her. Shoulder length now instead of the long waves she'd had at the motel. It made her look sharper, more corporate, more like the stranger she'd become. 10 minutes later, Danny strolled in alone, looking uncomfortable in a suit that didn't quite fit. He stood at the far end of the hallway, pretending to check his phone while stealing glances our way. "That's him?" Rita asked quietly. "That's him," I confirmed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Interesting, he's here for a preliminary hearing." Inside the courtroom, we sat on opposite sides of the aisle. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, called us forward with brisk efficiency. Jazz's lawyer spoke first, her voice silky with practiced concern. "Your Honor, my client seeks protection and fair distribution after years in a controlling relationship. Mr. Whitlock monitored her whereabouts, questioned her friendships, and created an atmosphere of constant surveillance. When Mrs. Whitlock sought independence, he escalated to stalking, following her to a hotel where she was simply meeting a work colleague. I felt heat rise in my neck, but kept my expression neutral. Rita had warned me about this, the strategy of reframing everything to make the victim look like the aggressor. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, Mr. Whitlock has withheld financial resources, leaving my client without adequate means to maintain herself during these proceedings. We request temporary spousal support and exclusive use of the marital residence. When Rita stood, she brought none of the theater, just calm, measured words and evidence. Your Honor, what we have here is a clear case of marital infidelity and financial misconduct. Mrs. Whitlock was not seeking independence, but conducting an ongoing affair with Mr. Mercer, who is present in the courtroom today. She gestured toward Danny, whose face flushed red. We have phone logs showing calls between Mrs. Whitlock and Mr. Mercer during times she claimed to be at yoga classes. Rita placed documents on the bench. Additionally, we have receipts showing withdrawals from joint accounts that correspond exactly with motel charges and restaurant bills, where Mrs. Whitlock and Mr. Mercer were seen together. The judge looked over the documents, her expression unchanging. As for financial control, Mr. Whitlock maintained the household, while Mrs. Whitlock had full access to joint accounts, her own separate accounts, and credit cards, which she used liberally for expenses related to her affair. This hardly constitutes financial abuse. The judge looked between both attorneys. I'm going to need more documentation before making determinations on temporary orders. I want complete financial disclosures from both parties within 7 days. Until then, all joint assets remain frozen except for ordinary living expenses. Outside the courtroom, Danny leaned against a marble pillar, whispering to Jazz as they huddled together. When I walked past with Rita, I heard him say clearly, "It's handled. Don't worry." I slowed, meeting his eyes with a cold smile that never touched my mouth. Danny stiffened slightly, but tried to maintain his smug expression. I continued walking, Rita's hand lightly touching my elbow as we headed for the exit. That evening, I stood on a stepladder, installing a small camera in the corner of my front porch. Not because I was paranoid, because I needed protection. The affair had been the first betrayal. The court filing with its fabrications was the second. I wasn't waiting for a third without evidence. Inside, I moved methodically through the house, photographing and cataloging Jazz's remaining possessions. Each item got listed in a spreadsheet: location, condition, approximate value. When she'd left with her parents, she'd taken clothes and personal items, but left most of our shared life untouched. Furniture, artwork, kitchenware. My phone rang. "Rita, how are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm documenting everything she left behind," I answered, continuing to type as I held the phone between my ear and shoulder, creating a baseline inventory. "Good. That's good." She paused. "Andre, I need you to understand something. Cases like this aren't won in explosive moments. They're won in silent, persistent documentation. Stay quiet, stay patient. Understood. Over the next 3 days, I observed patterns that confirmed my instincts. Twice before dawn, Danny's truck appeared on my street, parked just far enough away to claim coincidence, but close enough to monitor the house. I photographed the vehicle each time, noting dates and times in my growing case file. When I found cigarette butts at the edge of my property, the same brand I'd seen Danny smoking outside the courthouse, I bagged them as evidence. Not of anything criminal, necessarily, but of presence, of watching, of crossing boundaries. Each note I made felt like a quiet act of defiance. They thought I was the obsessive one. I was simply establishing reality, while they worked to distort it. Late on the third night, my phone buzzed with an alert from the doorbell camera I'd installed. The screen showed Danny's truck pulling into my driveway, headlights off. I grabbed my phone and walked calmly to the front door, opening it before he could approach. Danny froze halfway out of his truck, clearly not expecting confrontation. "Can I help you?" I asked, voice steady as I held my phone up, obviously recording. "I was just turning around," he mumbled, scrambling back into the driver's seat. "License plate TMR 847, I said clearly for the recording as he backed out hastily. "Time? 11:42 p.m. "Date?" I continued documenting as the taillights disappeared down the street. I looked into the camera on my phone, speaking softly but firmly. "You shouldn't have come here." 3 days later, I sat across from Jazz in a deposition room that felt too small for the tension it contained. The walls were beige, plain except for a framed bar certification and a generic landscape print. Under the fluorescent lights, Jazz looked both polished and brittle, her makeup perfect, her posture rigid, her fingers constantly adjusting her watch strap. Rita sat beside me, her legal pad covered with neat handwriting. Across the table, Jazz's attorney, a slick guy named Harmon with an expensive tie, shuffled papers importantly. The court reporter positioned her stenography machine, fingers poised. The air smelled of ink, coffee, and something sharper. Anxiety, maybe. Jazz's perfume cut through it all, the same scent I'd found lingering on the credit card statements for high-end department stores. "Please state your name for the record," the court reporter began. "Jasmine Elena Whitlock," Jazz said, her voice carrying that practiced smoothness I once found charming. Rita began methodically, asking background questions that seemed innocent. Employment history, education, our marriage timeline. I watched Jazz relax slightly, probably thinking this would be easy. The slight smile playing at Rita's lips told me she was just warming up. "Mrs. Whitlock, when did your relationship with Daniel Mercer begin?" Rita asked, her tone casual. Jazz's fingers twitched. "We're friends. We became closer after Andre and I separated." "Just friends?" Rita pressed. "We've had occasional overnights," Jazz admitted, choosing her words carefully. "But that was after the separation. I've done nothing wrong." Rita nodded, her expression neutral as she pulled a folder from her briefcase. "I'd like to introduce Exhibit C," she said, sliding time-stamped photos across the table. Security camera screenshots from the Hillcrest Motel parking lot, dated months before our separation. The color drained from Jazz's face. "Would you like to revise your previous answer?" Rita asked. Jazz's attorney leaned over, whispering something. She squared her shoulders. "I may have misspoken about the timeline. Let's be specific, then. When did your intimate relationship with Mr. Mercer begin?" Jazz's facade cracked slightly, her tone turning defensive. "I don't remember the exact date. Would January 15th sound accurate? 3 months before the separation?" Another whispered conference with her lawyer. "Possibly." Rita moved on, methodically establishing a timeline that contradicted everything Jazz had claimed in her court filings. With each question, Jazz's responses grew shorter, her body language more closed. "Let's discuss your finances," Rita said, transitioning smoothly. You've stated in your petition that Mr. Whitlock controlled all household money. Is that correct? Yes, Jazz said, finding firmer ground. He managed everything. Did you have access to the joint checking account ending in 4733? Limited access. Rita slid another document forward. This is your signature on these withdrawals, correct? 15 separate transactions labeled Wellness Retreat over 6 months? Jazz stared at the paper. Yes, but... And these withdrawals, ranging from $300 to $750 each, were taken on dates that coincide with overnight stays at the Hillcrest Motel, correct? Paul and Janice sat quietly in the corner of the room, where Jazz had insisted they be present for support. I watched their faces as the questioning continued. Paul's expression hardened with each revealed lie. Janice's eyes grew damp, her fingers twisting a tissue into shreds. I don't recall, Jazz said. You don't recall spending over $7,000 from your joint account on motel rooms with Mr. Mercer? Rita's voice remained perfectly calm, which made the question even more devastating. After 2 more hours of detailed questioning, the deposition ended. Jazz shoved back from the table, grabbing her purse and snapping at her lawyer. We need to talk. Now. I remained seated, steady and quiet, as they left. Paul stood to follow his daughter, but paused beside my chair. Andre, he said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. He seemed to search for words, then simply shook his head and walked out. That evening, Rita and I sat at a corner table in a quiet coffee shop, reviewing the deposition transcript that had been rushed to us. She's panicking, Rita said, highlighting a particularly damaging section where Jazz had contradicted herself about financial control. The story's falling apart. Her attorney knows it. Will it be enough? I asked, stirring my coffee more than necessary. Keep calm. She'll make another mistake, Rita assured me. People living double lives always do. They can't keep all the lies straight. Later that night, I found myself in my workshop, the one place that still felt entirely mine. I ran sandpaper over a plank of oak in long, even strokes. The rhythm grounded me, the physical work clearing my head in ways nothing else could. Sawdust caught the workshop lights like tiny stars falling. My phone lit up on the workbench. A message from Jazz. You'll never make me look bad. I wiped my hands on my jeans, picked up the phone, and smiled faintly. Instead of words, I replied with only a photo of the court transcript header, proof that her own testimony had already accomplished what she feared. A week later, my phone rang while I was measuring lumber for a staircase renovation. Rita's name flashed on the screen. I have bad news, she said, without preamble. Her voice had that careful neutrality lawyers use when they're about to drop something heavy. I set down my tape measure. Hit me with it. The judge reviewed your prenuptial agreement this morning. He's invalidated it due to a notary date error. Rita paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The notary dated it 3 days before you and Jazz actually signed it. My stomach plummeted. That prenup had been my financial shield. The barrier between Jazz and the business I'd built from scratch. How the hell did that happen? I asked, trying to keep my voice level as workers moved around me. The notary predated the form, assuming you'd signed that day. When you came back later, nobody caught it. Rita sighed. It's a technicality, but it's enough. Your prenup is void. I closed my eyes, remembering Jazz insisting we reschedule the signing, claiming she needed more time to read through it. Now I understood why. What does this mean for us? I asked. It means she can ask for more. A lot more. I thanked Rita and hung up, gripping my phone so tight I half expected it to crack. The crew needed direction, so I buried the news and finished the day's work, each hammer stroke a little harder than necessary. The next morning confirmed my worst fears. Jazz's attorney filed for significant spousal support, nearly 40% of my business income, plus half the value of my company, which I'd built before we'd even met. I drove straight to Rita's office, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The familiar smell of coffee and paper files filled her office, but brought no comfort this time. "Can she really get away with this?" I asked, pacing the small space between her desk and the door. Rita sighed, removing her glasses. "Not if we prove waste and deceit. The prenup's gone, but that doesn't erase her behavior." She leaned forward. "We need to document every penny she spent on this affair. Every hotel room, every meal, every gift. If we can prove she deliberately wasted marital assets—" "I'll get it," I said firmly. For the next 2 days, I became a forensic accountant of my own marriage. I tracked credit card statements against bank withdrawals, finding patterns of cash taken on Friday afternoons, always before yoga classes Jazz never came home sweaty from. I matched motel charges to my rewards account, discovering she'd used my points to pay for rooms with Danny. I even drove back to the Hillcrest Motel, swallowing my pride to talk to the clerk who'd given me that room key. His name was Marcus, a night manager working his way through community college. "I remember her," Marcus said, nodding when I showed him Jazz's photo. "Always paid with points, but tipped in cash. Usually Thursday nights, sometimes Fridays. Would you be willing to sign a statement confirming that?" I asked. He hesitated. "Look, man, I'm not trying to get involved in—" "She's trying to take my business," I said. "A business I built before I even met her." Something in my tone must have resonated. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I'll sign." Meanwhile, Jazz grew bolder. Text messages started coming in, little jabs designed to push me off balance. "Starting fresh with Danny feels so right," one read. "Can't wait to redecorate after the settlement." I didn't respond. Instead, I channeled my frustration into precision, building our case the same way I built houses, methodically, one solid piece connecting to the next. Late one evening, as I sorted through another stack of bank statements at my kitchen table, my email pinged. Rita had found something. Discrepancies in Danny's employer records. Some of the hotel expenses had been billed to a subcontractor account tied directly to my business. "Call me immediately," her email concluded. I dialed her number, my heartbeat quickening. "Danny's been double-dipping," Rita explained. "He submitted expense reports for client meetings at the Hillcrest on the same dates he met Jazz there. The charges went through a subcontractor you work with regularly." The connection sparked a new idea, a way to approach this that went beyond the divorce case. "He used company money to fund their affair," I said slowly, the implications unfolding in my mind. "And not just any company money. Money connected to my contracts." "Exactly," Rita confirmed. "This isn't just personal anymore. It's professional misconduct." I ran a hand through my hair, thinking of all the times I'd recommended Danny's firm for projects, all the business I'd helped bring their way. "You made this professional," I whispered. "That was your mistake." I spent the entire morning preparing the dining room, not for a dinner, but for an execution. The clean, paperwork kind that leaves no blood, but plenty of bodies. Each chair positioned just so, water glasses filled halfway, coffee brewing dark and strong like I needed my resolve to be. Jazz arrived first, wearing that cream-colored blouse she saved for important meetings, the one that cost more than my first set of power tools. "Andre," she nodded, feigning professional distance, as if we hadn't shared a bed for 7 years. "Coffee?" I asked, voice neutral as Switzerland. "Black," she replied, settling into what used to be her usual spot at the table. Paul and Janice arrived 5 minutes later, both looking like they'd aged years in weeks. Janice's eyes darted around the house, taking inventory of what remained. What had changed? Paul just looked tired. His shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. "Thanks for coming," I said, pouring them each a cup. Remember when Sunday mornings meant Janice's cinnamon rolls and easy conversation around this same table? The memory felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Danny showed up last, 10 minutes late, wearing arrogance like cologne. His handshake was brief, his smile plastic. "Appreciate the invite," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. I took my place at the head of the table, where the folder waited. Rita's voice came clear through the speakerphone I'd placed in the center. "Everyone here?" she asked. "We're all present," I confirmed. Jazz leaned forward. "Andre suggested settlement terms. I'm assuming that's why we're gathered?" I nodded. "That's exactly right." I slid the folder across the polished wood surface. "Here's what I can offer. You keep your car. We split the furniture evenly. No alimony. We both walk away." Jazz didn't even open the folder. She laughed. That short, dismissive sound I'd grown to recognize as her preamble to getting her way. "You don't get to set terms," she said, glancing at Danny for support. "Not after the prenup fell." I looked directly at Paul. "Paul, did you co-sign Jazz's first credit card? The one still forwarding statements to your address?" His eyes narrowed in confusion. "Yes. Why?" "Because your name's on 3 cash advances that funded their affair," I said evenly, reaching across to open the folder myself since Jazz wouldn't. "Page 4. Paul pulled the papers closer, adjusting his reading glasses. His hands began to tremble as he reviewed the statements. Dates, amounts, locations, all matching the timeline I'd constructed. "Jazz!" His voice cracked on his daughter's name. I continued methodically turning pages. "There's the timeline of withdrawals from our joint account labeled as Wellness Retreats. All correspond to nights at the Hillcrest Motel." I tapped another document. "And here's the record of room bookings made with points from my business credit card." Danny shifted uncomfortably, his confidence visibly deflating. "That's just the start," I said. "The most interesting part is on page 12. Danny's eyes snapped to the paperwork, and I knew he'd spotted it. Printed copies of text messages between him and Jazz, discussing how they'd max his limit until her settlement payday came through. "Where did you get those?" Jazz hissed, color draining from her face. "Your cloud backup synced to our home computer. You never logged out." I turned another page. "But the real problem isn't just the affair. It's this." I pointed to a spreadsheet detailing expense reports Danny had submitted to his company, the subcontractor that worked with my business, for client meetings at the Hillcrest, all matching dates with Jazz. Rita's voice cut through the silence. "That's misappropriation of company funds, potentially fraudulent expense reporting, and given the connection to Mr. Whitlock's business contracts, possible contract interference." Janice covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Paul stared at his daughter like she'd transformed into a stranger before his eyes. Jazz lunged for the folder. "This is harassment." "It's arithmetic," I corrected her calmly. "And one-party consent recordings are legal in this state." I pressed play on my phone, and Jazz's voice filled the room. "Once I get spousal, we'll refinance the house. Andre won't fight. He hates conflict." Danny pushed away from the table slightly, creating distance between himself and Jazz. Self-preservation taking over. Rita continued from the speaker. "Given the diversion of joint funds for the affair and the documented intent to extract settlement money under false pretenses, the court can deny or limit spousal support, award disproportionate assets to my client, and sanction bad faith litigation. We're prepared to proceed to trial with all this evidence." Jazz's eyes darted between Danny and her parents, searching for allies and finding none. Her shoulders sagged as the reality of her position settled over her. "Andre," she said, her voice suddenly soft, almost like the woman I'd married, "please don't ruin us." I looked at her, really looked at her, feeling nothing but a calm, almost clinical pity. "You already did that," I said quietly. "I'm just writing the report." The silence that followed was so absolute, so dense with consequence, that even the ticking of the kitchen clock sounded like judgment being handed down, 1 second at a time. The courthouse air felt thick with anticipation as we took our seats. The past months had compressed into this single morning, this final reckoning. Jazz sat across the aisle, her posture perfect, but her eyes darting nervously around the room. Her attorney shuffled papers with false confidence. Neither Danny nor her parents were present. Judge Miriam Keene entered the courtroom with measured steps, her silver hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on her nose. I'd learned from Rita that Judge Keene had a reputation for fairness and zero tolerance for financial games. "Good morning," she said, settling into her chair. "Let's proceed with Whitlock v. Whitlock." Rita stood first, her navy suit crisp, her voice steady. "Your Honor, we'd like to begin by addressing the financial evidence." What followed felt like watching someone build a house, brick by methodical brick. Rita presented our documentation chronologically: the joint account withdrawals, the pattern of wellness retreat expenses matching hotel dates, the time-stamped photos, each piece connected to the next with devastating precision. I remembered the nights spent organizing all this, sitting at the kitchen counter with receipts spread across the surface, the house too quiet around me. The work had kept me sane when nothing else could. "Furthermore," Rita continued, "we have evidence that the respondent and Mr. Mercer discussed using anticipated spousal support for mutual benefit, demonstrating bad faith in these proceedings." Jazz's lawyer objected, claiming the texts were obtained improperly. Judge Keene overruled him after Rita explained the device ownership and backup settings. "Your Honor," Jazz's lawyer tried again, "my client admits to indiscretion, but maintains that Mr. Whitlock's financial claims are exaggerated and motivated by vindictiveness." Judge Keene peered over her glasses. "Counselor, I'm looking at bank records, not opinions. These withdrawals occurred. The timeline aligns with hotel charges. Do you have documentation showing otherwise?" He didn't. I watched his shoulders slump slightly. Rita then introduced the evidence about Danny's misuse of company funds. Expense reports submitted to his employer, a subcontractor tied to my business, for client meetings that were actually rendezvous with Jazz. "The court should note," Rita said, "this constitutes potential fraud against Mr. Whitlock's business interests, further undermining claims for spousal support." Judge Keene nodded, making notes. "I'll be referring this matter to the appropriate authorities for review." Jazz's composure finally cracked. I saw her hands trembling as she whispered urgently to her lawyer, who shook his head slightly. After both sides presented closing arguments, Judge Keene removed her glasses and looked directly at us. "I've reviewed all evidence carefully," she began. "This court finds substantial evidence of financial misconduct by the respondent during the marriage. The diversion of joint funds for personal use outside the marriage constitutes marital waste." She continued with legal terminology that Rita had prepared me for, but the essence was clear. No spousal support awarded to Jazz, no damages against me, and the court noted the evidence showed bad faith in the proceedings. "Additionally," Judge Keene added, "I am referring the evidence regarding Mr. Mercer's financial activities to the prosecutor's office for review of potential fraudulent reporting." The gavel fell with a sharp crack that seemed to physically release something inside me. Jazz's head dropped forward, her shoulders shaking slightly. I felt nothing watching her. No satisfaction, no pity, just a strange, hollow completion. Outside, sunlight hit my face with unexpected warmth. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in months. The air tasted cleaner somehow. Rita joined me, her professional mask softening slightly. "You did everything right," she said, allowing herself a small smile. "Documented everything, stayed focused, kept your composure when it mattered most." I nodded, relief washing through me, tempered with bone-deep exhaustion. "Thank you," I said simply. That evening, I returned to the house. My house now, officially and completely. I restored order to the living room, straightening furniture that had been jostled during Jazz's final removal of her belongings. I wiped down counters, vacuumed carpet fibers, erasing the last physical traces of the morning's tension. In my office, I opened the safe and placed the evidence folder inside. then locked it away. Not as a trophy, but as insurance, something I hoped never to need again. I moved through the quiet rooms, turning on a single lamp in the living room. Sitting in my chair, I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of months finally lifting. "It's over," I murmured to the empty room, "but it'll echo for them forever." 6 months rolled by like clouds after a storm. The house felt different now, quieter, but not in that tense way it used to be. Just peaceful. I'd wake up early, pad downstairs, and brew coffee without that knot in my stomach, without bracing for impact. That feeling alone was worth everything I'd been through. My morning ritual became something I actually looked forward to. Coffee in hand, I'd take slow drives before work, sometimes just circling the lake or heading up toward the hills where the sun broke through the trees in these perfect golden slices. No hurry, no checking my phone every 5 minutes, no knot of dread when it buzzed. Just me, the road, and whatever was playing on the radio. The contracting business picked up again. Word got around about Danny's ethics issues with my former subcontractor, and somehow that translated into more calls coming my way. People respect someone who stands their ground, I guess. I hired 2 more guys to handle the workload, and even started taking Sundays completely off, something I hadn't done in years. Sleep came easier, too. That's a strange thing to notice, but when you've spent months staring at the ceiling, calculating losses and planning defenses, actually falling asleep before midnight feels like a miracle. I'd drift off without my mind racing, without rehearsing conversations or arguments, just close my eyes. And then it was morning. The distance makes things clearer. Jazz was across town in a 1-bedroom apartment, struggling to make ends meet after the judgment stripped away her financial fantasies. Mike Rivera, who still worked with her marketing team, mentioned she'd been demoted after an internal review discovered her misuse of the corporate card. Those business trips that were really rendezvous with Danny. They didn't fire her outright, corporate politics being what they are, but the demotion spoke loud enough. The whispers followed her through office hallways. When I think about her now, it's like watching a movie about someone I used to know. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if there was a moment when we could have turned things around. But then I remember the coldness in her eyes at that motel, the calculation behind every move. There was no saving what we had because she'd already set it on fire. Danny's fall came faster. The subcontractor audit wasn't kind. Falsified expense reports, misappropriated funds for client meetings that were actually nights with my wife. They fired him within weeks of the hearing. His professional reputation collapsed like a house built on sand. Last I heard from Carlos, who does supply runs out to Millerton County, Danny was picking up day labor gigs at construction sites 2 counties over, starting from scratch with a record no contractor in our area would touch. Their relationship didn't survive either. Jazz's friend Melissa let slip at Ray's hardware store that Danny ghosted Jazz just weeks after the hearing, left her with half his lease payments, and disappeared. Apparently, Jazz tried calling him for weeks, showing up at his temporary jobs, even sending flowers to his mother's house. No response. When the money dried up, so did whatever they thought they had. It was a Tuesday evening when her voicemail came through. I was on the back deck, sanding down a new coffee table I was building just because I wanted to, not because I needed to fill empty time. I didn't recognize the number at first, but then her voice came through, thin and trembling. "Andre, it's me. I don't expect you to call back. I should have never crossed you. I'm sorry. Not that it matters now." I stood there, phone in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky with colors that used to remind me of her. I deleted the message without a word and went back to my sanding. The apology wasn't for me. It was for her. Some people only feel remorse when consequences arrive. The next morning was particularly clear, one of those perfect early autumn days when summer's heat breaks and everything feels possible again. I stepped outside with my coffee. Sunlight spilling across the porch boards I'd replaced myself. Taking a long breath, I felt it finally. Real peace, not just the absence of chaos. When they betray you, I said softly to no one but the morning air, don't burn everything. Just cut the power. The dark shows their true faces. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.